The immortal John Hancock here, talking about buying nostalgia. Is it worth it? Many of you know I'm a huge Star Wars fan, and recently I picked up Star Wars Arcade. This is the 1-Up arcade version of this. I waited and waited. It was very difficult to find in my area, and I wanted this game really bad. So I waited for it to go on sale through Walmart, ended up picking it up. And today I'm going to be showing an unboxing, assembly, and gameplay footage. Let's check it out. So here it is. I thought I would show this footage as it took about 2 hours to fully assemble everything. The actual box that the Star Wars arcade cabinet and riser comes in, it's thick like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cabinet packaging as well. There was a few issues with how it was packaged. My cabinet border had some scuffs on it. Nothing major though. Most things were properly packaged. Though the organization of it, I had to kind of search through boxes. There wasn't like a real great organizational manner to how they packaged it. It was mostly for space. And so you have to be very careful when assembling these. Make sure you have a good screwdriver, especially one with a magnetic tip. You're going to need it as you assemble this. This is my 4th arcade cabinet that I've assembled. I have 2 currently in my possession, and this one being the 3rd. And so I have a Pac-Man and a Final Fight arcade cab. This one has a little bit more to it with the speakers and the light-up marquee. And so I do find that if you assemble it following the instructions, you're going to be less frustrated. For people that don't like to follow directions and use the manual, I do recommend it. You know, I've had less issues by following directions, reading every page, making sure to follow the manual. You're going to find you're not going to have to go back and fix things. And so I thought the manual they did with the Star Wars arcade cabinet is pretty decent. Another video to watch too is Arcade USA. He does a really good job at showing the manual in his video as well. He does a good friend of mine. So anyways, I didn't have a lot of problems putting it together. There's a couple things that you should note is that you got to be very careful when taking off the protective film on the monitor. It is easy to scuff, and so you want to do that, you know, possibly at the last minute. I did a little bit early. It didn't tell me to do that yet when putting this together. Yes, and so these cabinets are fairly cheap. It's not a one-to-one of the original. I did find, though, the instructions to be pretty straightforward. There was some challenges with the screws. Again, having a decent screwdriver. I do recommend a manual screwdriver, as the materials that were used with this cabinet are fairly cheap, easy to break things. And so a lot of the challenge of putting this together is the final part when you're actually putting the side cabinet art on top. That can be a challenge. And so just take your time, getting things lined up just right. The more time that you take getting it lined up correctly, you're going to be more satisfied with the final result. You don't want this thing to fall apart on you. You know, this is something that, for a lot of people out there growing up with Star Wars, you're going to appreciate it. And so just taking your time and spending the extra minute or two getting it done correctly and following the instructions, you're going to be more satisfied with this. And so, again, what I was saying earlier is putting that top piece, connecting it just right. It takes a little bit of time. You have to align everything just right. Once you get that down, this is my 4th cabinet put together, and so I had a little bit of patience and experience doing it. And so for some people out there, no big deal. For other people, you might get frustrated. Now, the other thing that you need to be careful with is properly installing the monitor, and so that's probably the most challenging piece, just because of spaces. And so getting that monitor screwed in correctly. I use a light off my phone just to make sure it's just done right. And that magnetic tip screwdriver comes in really handy. There's a couple different ways of doing it, but that's going to help you out. Now the control of the Star Wars Arcade, the yoke, it feels really solid. I was actually really satisfied with it. Also, make sure to take that film off the top part of your control panel. That is there for protection so it doesn't get scraped up. And so it took me about 2 hours to complete this assembly, and one that I enjoyed doing. I wanted to take my time. This is something I've wanted for a long time. I knew about this over a year ago and was patiently waiting for it to go on sale. Finally, it got to a price where I felt like I could afford it. I paid $350 for this arcade cabinet. It was on sale. Retail, I think it goes for like $500, which I think is kind of high. But in that range, I thought it was worth it for me. And so, you know, it comes with its own custom riser. I also like that. One thing to mention is that this isn't going to be the same height as the other arcade 1-ups. It has its own kind of unique dimensions. Also, don't show in this video the screws that you can screw the riser into the arcade cabinet. It makes it a little bit more safe. Also, there's some parts on the back of the arcade 1-up machine that make it a little bit more kid-friendly. So you also need to follow those directions for complete assembly. But overall, I had a pretty good experience putting it together. I just took my time. I took one break in between and took about 2 hours, as mentioned before. And I do recommend you taking your time and having proper tools and space. There's lots of parts and packaging. You're going to need a clear space to do this. It helped me just having a clear floor space and the time to put it together. Once it was put together, voila, there it is. Fully assembled. It is a little bit taller than my Pac-Man 1-up arcade cabinet. I really like what they did with the replica control. It feels really solid. I'm looking forward to checking that out more. Here's the riser with the arcade cabinet. It's really nice complement to it. The riser is a little bit taller than the other risers, the generic risers from 1-up arcade. There's a couple issues that I had. The decal, there's like just like a little bit of an overlap on the side, and also the border has a little bit of scrapes I couldn't get out. I was a little frustrated with that. So, you know, and I was really careful putting this together, and so it's just how it came. Also want to mention that there's a cable inside that connects it to the power for the marquee, and it's kind of visible. I didn't show that on this video, but it's also worth mentioning that you'll have to adjust that cable so you don't see it as much on your marquee. So here's the boot up sequence. When you first power it on, you have a selection here of all three, and then below are settings. I really like that they offer more settings than a standard arcade 1-up machine. You can determine what shields you start with, the difficulty, how many bonus shields that you have. I like that there are several adjustments. Since each game plays a little bit differently, it's nice to have these. The vector glow, for this footage, I'm going to put none. I didn't like a lot of the different effects that it offered. And so this is the very first Star Wars arcade game. Here it is. It's pretty much my childhood in an arcade cabinet. You know, I went to the arcades and played this quite a bit. So I have a lot of experience with the original arcade machine, how it plays, how it sounds. It has this kind of introduction, light speed sequence.
Good time, standing by.
Start on medium. Here we go. And so it's playing pretty good. I'm not going to say 100% perfect. There was a couple sound issues with the voiceover, with saying an extra word. I didn't show it in this footage, but yeah, so overall it sounds pretty good. Plays great though. I have to say the strength of the arcade cabinet is the flight yoke. I have to say they did a good job there. Take that, Vader. And so yes, and so if you're not familiar with Star Wars Arcade, it is a great kind of throwback to the original Star Wars. First thing, you're taking out TIE fighters. Next, you're taking out the towers, which wasn't shown in the original Star Wars, and I often forget about that quote. But here it is. You know, here's another part of what they did on the Death Star. And so taking out the towers, and you know, you're shooting down the sparkly things coming at you, or whatever they call those. But yeah, it's got great control. If you haven't messed around with the Star Wars flight yoke, it's pretty neat. It's a pretty neat control setup, and the replica made for the 1-Up arcade is definitely the strength. I'm getting worked here. So then finally do the classic trench run, and on medium you have to go up and down and maneuver through the trench run. There are these barriers that you have to avoid, or it takes out your shields. It's a lot of fun. This is definitely a throwback, and definitely nostalgia for people that are classic Star Wars fans. Definitely one of the better color vector arcade games of the 80s. Oh, see, I'm down to one shield. Getting pretty worked here. At the end, you got to hit the exhaust port, and then you fly away from the Death Star as it explodes. That's a great sound. So there's Star Wars Arcade. And so here's Empire Strikes Back, which is a follow-up. This was offered as a kit upgrade to the original Star Wars using the same control. And it's not known about as much. I think Star Wars Arcade is a better game, but Empire Strikes Back is pretty good. It's definitely something. If you're a fan of Empire, you haven't checked it out, check it out in emulator. And so yes, same things, a lot of the same settings for Empire here. Checking it out. Kind of gives you game controls there. Haven't played this in a while, so it's nice to go back. I think the last time I played it was on GameCube. I think Rebel Strike has this as an arcade game you can play.
He could destroy us.
Here it is, Empire Strikes Back. I'm going to try medium. The Executor.
We picked up something outside base.
So, your first part of the level, you're on Hoth, taking out Imperial probe droids. You're trying to stop their communications to the Empire. And, it's definitely, you're in a snow speeder, first part. Shield's kind of the same gameplay style as Star Wars Arcade. You want to take it out, things firing at you, trying to spell Jedi. And then with the Imperial walkers, you can launch your tow cable and at the legs, and if you aim it just right, you can take them out. You can also fire at them once they're down and get bonus points. And then the ATSTs here, if you hit them just right, you can take them out as well. So yes, there's lots of different bonuses and ways of playing Empire. Lots of fun there. So then the next part, you're taking out TIE fighters. You're trying to get away from the Empire. Have to take out so many TIEs. Reminiscent of essentially the first game. Empire Strikes Back is my favorite Star Wars movie of all time. What is yours? And I thought they did a good job of representing the movie. It's not as good as Star Wars Arcade, but it's pretty good. It's definitely better than the Nintendo version of Empire Strikes Back or even the Game Boy version. And so the next level, you're avoiding geometric asteroids. And so, back in the day, this was, pretty amazing graphics. It's definitely more dated now. There's some people that would probably wish that 1-Up Arcade would do some of the more modern Star Wars arcade games. Likewise, I'd love them to do it. There it is. There's Vader. And that's Empire Strikes Back. Next is probably the weakest of the three. This is Return of the Jedi. I'm going to keep the scan lines on. You can turn them off. I prefer to have them off, but by default they are on, and so I'm going to show that. And so same thing, you have various settings that you can put. I'm going to play it a little bit easier just because it is a more difficult and challenging game. And some people didn't like the isometric view of it. Essentially, you're on a speeder bike and trying to get through Endor to the end of the level, and then it jumps to Death Star, the Death Star 2 taking out in the Falcon. And so nice intro there. So here you go with the scan lines on, and so you're navigating the forest of Endor. You have biker scouts trying to take you out. You're navigating through trees. It can be pretty challenging on more difficult settings. You have Ewoks helping you out, taking them out. You cannot hit trees. The control, by moving the yoke down, you can go faster. By moving up, you go slower, and you get to the end. And Yub Nub celebrate with Ewoks on to the next stage. And so you're doing, you're flying inside the Death Star. These graphics kind of remind me of something I would see on Nintendo, so it's kind of weird seeing an arcade game like this. It just, definitely reminds me of like Nintendo graphics. And so fairly challenging. This part is actually easier than the second part, which is really challenging because it kind of messes with your mind a little bit on control. And so you're flying through, avoiding TIE interceptors, and avoiding the shots, and then you take out the reactor, and then you fly back around and get out, and then the controls like reverse, and then that's what makes it pretty difficult. At the end of the day, buying nostalgia for me was worth it. However, some things to consider. Is it a one-to-one replica of the original arcade machine? No. There are a few issues that I had with my arcade cabinet, but I'm okay with those things. You may not be. The price is a little bit higher. A lot of people have talked about complaining about the price. The retail, I think this is not on sale. It's $500. You can find them typically on sale at Walmart. That's where I found mine for a cheaper price. That's why I went for it. There's also a sit-down version that's coming out soon. And all it is it's like a bench that's connected to the same arcade cabinet. I wish they would sell that bench separately for people such as myself that would like to maybe experience both versions. Anyways, thank you for the ongoing support, and hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. This is the Immortal John Hancock. Thank you for watching this video. You take care.